Welcome to the Tournament Poker Edge podcast, brought to you by TournamentPokerEdge.com, the only podcast dedicated exclusively to poker tournament strategy. Now here's your host, Clayton Fletcher.
Hello once again, everybody, and welcome to the Tournament Poker Edge podcast. I'm your host, Clayton Fletcher, here in New York City, but not for long, because soon I will be boarding a plane and heading to fabulous Las Vegas, Nevada, and I'm so excited for my trip. Hard to believe it's been 1 year since I was burglarized. Some of you may remember me harping on this horrible experience I had at Bally's Las Vegas. Needless to say, I will not be staying there on this trip. I'm going to be doing a show with Joe Stapleton and Ben Ludlow and several other hilarious comedians on Friday, November 22nd. So if you're in the Las Vegas area and you want to come see some comedy, check out The Space LV for details about the, leaving Las Vegas. No, laughing and lolling and I'm bad at stuff like this. They took a movie title and changed it. Anyway, you can't miss it. The Space LV on November 22nd. So I want you guys to check that out. And also the next night in Newport Beach, California, the LA area, I want you guys to come out and support the charity series of poker. We're partnering with Mickey's Miracles, which is a charity that helps children with epilepsy. So that's something that's very near and dear to my heart, because I actually have several family members who have struggled with epilepsy over the years. Thankfully, it's all it's under control now, but I love the idea of playing poker and being funny and making some money for this wonderful organization called Mickey's Miracles. So there's going to be a dinner, a comedy show, a musical performance, and of course a poker tournament, and that's in Newport Beach, California on November 23rd. Did I mention I'm co-hosting this event with the great Daniel Negreanu? So if you want to watch Daniel and me make fun of each other, this is the place to do it. November 23rd in Southern California. Okay, so enough plugging. Let's get to it. The hot topic this week is, of course, what happened with the World Series of Poker Player of the Year competition. Let me talk about POY for a few minutes here, because I think this is something that should mean something. Player of the Year. One thing they do, I think they still do, is in one of the hallways during the WSOP, the Rio is adorned with photographs of all the past players of the year. Right now, there's no prize for Player of the Year. It's just a little, I guess it's really just bragging rights, or maybe just, your legacy or whatever, if you care about that sort of thing. In the old days, and by the old days I mean something like 2004, 2005, there was a corporate sponsor for World Series of Poker Player of the Year, and I believe it was Toyota. It may have been another car company, but in addition to all of the fame and glory of winning Player of the Year, the person who won it also got a car. And I think one year there may have been like a fancy piece of jewelry, like a watch or something like that. I think there should be a prize for Player of the Year. It might make more players aspire to win it. I don't think that prize should come from our buy-ins. I think they're raking plenty already. And they should either get a corporate sponsor, or, God forbid, Caesars, who makes a killing on the World Series every year, actually put up a prize for someone to win. That would be, of course, too much to ask. But I don't want to sound too bitter. I just think that in this age of Vegas casinos having to answer to their shareholders, I think it would be a lot for them to spend extra money that they could count as profit on something like a prize for Player of the Year. I don't know. Maybe they could do it. I think a better route would be to get a corporate sponsor to put up either a cash prize or something like a car, or I don't know, something that would be make it more than just, hey, it's these rivals. Of course, this year it was Daniel, and then it wasn't. So basically, there was some kind of accounting error. The computer that keeps track of POY points had Daniel in first place, and then it turned out that a lot of people that played in a certain online event but didn't cash in that event ended up getting points for that event, and it turned out that Daniel was not the first place winner after all. Some have suggested that Daniel was trying to cheat and that he knew exactly how many points he had. Look, guys, I've been critical of Daniel, as we all have over the years, and for many, many good reasons. But I don't think that it's in his character to allow himself to be awarded a prize that doesn't even have any cash value. I mean, maybe if you win $1 million for Player of the Year, who among us wouldn't point out that, oh, by the way, I got points that I shouldn't have gotten. But since it's just for bragging rights against his rival, Sean Deeb, and if you don't follow the two of them on Twitter, you're really missing out on some very good hashtag poker Twitter drama. Yeah, so I don't think that he realized that he had these points. In fact, it was a third party, someone I believe in Hungary or Russia, somewhere in Eastern Europe, that actually was the first to uncover this error in the calculations. For me, if I see this player has X number of POY points, I just take it at face value. I assume that these numbers are being checked, but I guess maybe I should never assume anything. So this has kind of led to Daniel and others sharing their thoughts on Player of the Year going forward. Should we even have a Player of the Year? To me, if there's no prize for it and it doesn't really mean anything, then I don't even think we should have it. But of course, somebody's going to create a system where we can rate who had the best World Series of Poker. I mean, obviously, in a perfect world, the Player of the Year would be the player who has the best World Series. Now, some players have basically unlimited bankrolls, and they can afford to fire and fire and fire and fire into tournaments that have re-entries, of which several WSOP events did this year. So that is a little bit unfair, I think, because they're not counting all of those buy-ins against the players. So if they suddenly decided that Clayton Fletcher is now in charge of the POY race, here's what I would do. I would say, we're going to keep track of all your buy-ins, and we're going to do a net of the wins and the losses. But I think we should have 3 categories of buy-ins. So the first category would be the cheapest tournaments, like anything $1,000 and under. And then we could go all the buy-ins from 1K to 5K as a second category. Let's call it category B. And then the high roller category would be anything $5,001 and up. So for me, this would allow players who are, at different bankroll levels to still have a reasonable chance of POY. And I would calculate how many points you get, not on how many dollars you win, but on how many buy-ins you win. So if you play in a low-stakes category A, for example, let's say you play a $600 buy-in and you win $3,000 total, which includes subtracting your buy-ins, whether you fired 2 or 3 or 4 times or whatever, you end up winning an actual net win of $3,000. I would call that 5 buy-ins. You ended up plus 5 times the actual buy-in. So you would get 5 points for that. And if you did the same exact thing, but in a category B tournament, which is the mid stakes, then I would count that as twice as many points. So instead of 5 points for 5 buy-ins, you would win 10 points for 5 buy-ins in that category, and then triple for the higher stakes, reflecting the fact that the higher stakes tournaments are generally much tougher to do well in. So I think that would be a system where if you want to play a bunch of these low stakes tournaments, as long as you go deep in some of them, you would have a shot at getting enough Player of the Year points to possibly win the prize. And again, that prize should be something like, I don't know, a Cadillac SUV or a Rolex watch, something that would kind of come with it a certain, cachet. I don't believe that there should be extra points for making a final table, finishing in the top 3 tables. Like, I don't believe in bonus points at all for this because, look, not all final tables are created equal. Like, if you play the Raz tournament, say you play the 5K Raz, making that final table shouldn't really count for any bonus Player of the Year points because there just aren't that many players. Not all final tables are equally easy to make. Making the final table of the main event, which has 8,000 players in it, is much harder than making the final table of a tougher event with only 100 players in it or 200 players in it. So some of these bracelet events get really small fields. So I think we should do away with whatever bonus points they're now awarding for Player of the Year if you're making final tables. I don't mind if we want to have a bracelet bonus because whether we like it or not, the bracelet is still the benchmark for kind of rating poker players. So I don't mind if you want to do that, but I don't think there should be anything special for a final table or anything like that. And there again, I think we need to subtract the extra buy-ins, and any buy-in that you spent but didn't cash on, I think should be counted against your Player of the Year points. Because what's happening now, and I know that this will never happen because kind of the dirty little secret of poker is we want to always give the impression that people are making, like if you go to my Hendon Mob, it says I've won like $500,000 playing poker. Of course, they're not subtracting all the buy-ins. They're just recording my cashes, which is really kind of a meaningless number because how much did I spend trying to get my Hendon Mob up to $500,000? How many tournaments have I played? How many buy-ins have I put in? What is the actual net profit? And I think for something like Player of the Year, with the prestige and, in my opinion, the luxury prize that should come with it, there should actually be accountability. So it's possible that you could win 3 bracelets in a certain World Series of Poker and still come out in the red. So because of that, I think we should keep track of that. And the World Series, they do. I mean, obviously you get a receipt every time you do a buy-in, and that little computer knows exactly how much you spent playing poker. So those are my thoughts. I'd love to hear your ideas. I know Daniel put out kind of a manifesto about what he would do. He said something like just take 10 caches so that, multi-firing into every single event won't really help win the Player of the Year because they're going to stop counting after 10. I don't know if he said the first 10 or the top 10. But yeah, I like both of those ideas. If you're not going to do a net, I like the net idea because that way, sure, you can buy in as many times as you want. But if you don't actually profit in a tournament, you're not going to get Player of the Year points for that tournament. I don't know if we should do negative points if you end up losing enough, or if it just if you don't profit, you can't get a positive outcome. So you either get a 0 if you don't profit, or you get kind of the scale that I mentioned earlier for the 3 different tiers. Or you could also do 4 different tiers or 5 different tiers, or a different point system for each and every buy-in level if you want to. But I do think the system is currently flawed because, as Daniel points out, right now the system is such that you could literally late reg every event that allows late registration, which is all of them, and pretty much fold your way to a min cash in every single tournament you play. So that's a messed up system already, even outside of Player of the Year. It should not be that easy to cash in a tournament. Now, of course, if you do that, you don't give yourself much chance of making the final table or winning the bracelet, but they're sacrificing their actual equity in the tournament had they bought in on time. However, because they were being given, to me, an inordinate amount of Player of the Year points, it's therefore unfair to everyone who's actually trying to win the darn thing. So, those are my thoughts. I'd love to hear from you. Twitter, @Clayton Comic. You can tweet me with your ideas about Player of the Year, whether you read what Daniel proposed going forward. By the way, I thought Daniel was very gracious in defeat. As it turned out, he didn't win. I wonder if had Sean Deeb won, he would have been as gracious. Probably not. But still, it's fun to follow, especially as they head to the WSOPE and try to bring it all the way down to the wire and see who's going to win this thing. And then it turns out some of the numbers were a little off. So obviously we need a better system. Anyway, tell me what you think. Twitter, @Clayton Comic. I always love to hear from you guys. Now let's continue our review of some hands that were played in this year's main event. This is going to be from day 3. Actually, I'd like to do 2 hands in a row from the very same table. These 2 hands are very interesting to me because they both involve some donk leading. And you guys have heard me on this podcast talk about how I believe that you should have a donk leading range on a lot of boards, and that I know it's tricky to construct that range, but as the computers that are out there trying to solve this game we call No Limit Texas Hold'em, they are determining that donk leading is part of a balanced strategy. So in the last 3 to 5 years, most professional players pretty much always check to the razor. And that's been the trend. And as I discuss kind of the nuances of this strategy with my professional poker playing friends, many of them just say it's because it's too hard to be balanced. And when you donk lead, you are basically revealing the strength of your hand. I said, well, then why can't you just put some very strong hands into your range? So basically the argument is you would never donk lead with a set. But in my experience, many times, not always, but many times when you're in poor position and you flop a set, just betting right out with it is the best way to confuse your opponents as to what's happening. Balancing that, of course, with some medium strength hands, maybe like a pair below top pair, as well as some draws, should be good enough to basically keep your hand strength disguised, particularly when it's very strong. So anyway, let's just keep that in mind as we're going to see a donk lead in each of the following hands. So this is from day 3 of the main event. The blinds are 1,500 and 3,000 with a 3,000 big blind ante. So there's 7,500 in the pot. At this table, we have some very highly regarded professional players, Yuri Zivaleski and Olivia Bousquet. And there is also Philip Hui, who I believe won the 50K Poker Players Championship this year. So this table is no joke. So in this hand, under the gun, we have Yuri Zivaleski, who, if you don't know Yuri, he's a very, very strong extremely loose, aggressive player. He doesn't care about starting ranges and position. He cares about getting after pretty much every pot, at least pre-flop. Of course, I'm exaggerating. No one can be profitable playing every pot, but Yuri opens a lot more than most of us do. So here he is under the gun with the queen of diamonds and 10 of spades. And Olivier Bousquet, very curiously here, in second position. So to Yuri's immediate left, what most of you call under the gun +1. He's got ace king. And these guys are deep stacked. Again, the blinds are 1,500, 3K with a 3K big blind ante. And Yuri's got 575,000, which is one of the biggest stacks in the tournament. And Olivier not far behind with 530,000. So these guys are doing well in this tournament. They're both in the top 50 of all the stacks remaining in the tournament. Olivier, very curiously, just calls. I want to talk about this decision first, because years ago, I heard, I'm embarrassed to say I can't remember who, but it was one of the top players talk on a podcast similar to this one about not having a 3-bet range from second position. So in other words, because the under the gun range needs to be so strong to be, theoretically, of course, it shouldn't have hands like Queen 10 in it. Because it should be such a strong range. If you have a hand that wants to 3-bet and under the gun open and you're only in second position, you're basically announcing to the world that your hand strength is, maybe 3 or 4 hands tops. It's very hard to find bluffs in this spot. I mean, do you really want to 3-bet here with like ace 4 of diamonds when you've got 9,000 players yet to act behind you, and also an under the gun raiser who probably has a strong hand? So because we don't have any bluffs, I wish I could remember who it was. Someone that I respect a lot said, don't ever 3-bet from this position. Just don't have a 3-betting range from second position. I wonder if Bousquet subscribes to that point of view, because he just flat calls here with ace king. If you were to have a 3-betting range, especially against such a loose, aggressive opener, I would certainly expect you to put ace king into that range. But obviously, Bousquet is, a genius and a mathematical wizard, and he probably knows that you don't want to do anything all the time. So the fact that he flat calls here doesn't mean that he never 3-bets in this situation with anything. But for whatever reason, he opts to just go ahead and call. It's worth noting that the blinds are occupied in this hand by 2 amateur players. The small blind is Tim Smith, and the big blind is Brandon Frazier, not the actor, just another guy named Brandon Frazier. So it folds all the way around to Smith in the small blind with King Jack offsuit. He's got the King of Diamonds and Jack of Clubs and 470,000 in chips. Now look, all of these guys have well over 100 big blinds. So we're deep stacked here. And then Frazier in the big blind with 190,000 is the short stack at the table, and he calls. So I don't want to tell you what Brandon has, and you'll see why in a minute. So 4 to the flop. Players have Queen 10, Ace King, King Jack, and a hand that I don't want to reveal at this time. So the flop comes Jack 4-4, Rainbow, Jack of Diamonds, 4 of Hearts, 4 of Clubs. And into 3 opponents, Tim Smith, Donk leads out 12,000 right into everybody with his King Jack. 12,000 into 31,000. And on his immediate left, the big blind, Brandon Frazier, calls. Zivaleski and Bousquet both fold. So when Frazier makes the call, that leaves 55,000 in the pot. and only about 175 in Fraser's stack. The turn is the 8 of spades. So the board now Jack 4, 4, 8, Badoogie, one of each suit. And Smith fires again with King Jack, 18K into 55K. Now this feels like a blocking bet to me. He doesn't want to check and give Fraser the opportunity to take the pot away, but he also doesn't want to make too large of a bet because it's possible that if anybody has a 4 and made trips on this board, it might be the big blind who was so priced in to call with virtually any 2 cards before the flop. So because of that, Smith goes for this small sizing, actually less than 1/3 of the pot. And again, Fraser makes the call. Just a reminder, I did not tell you what Fraser has. Well, let's put ourselves in the shoes of our small blind, Tim Smith. You know, you have King Jack, and it comes Jack 4, 4, and then the turn's an 8, and you've gotten called twice. How do you feel about your hand? I mean, are you starting to worry now that perhaps your King Jack is no good? Are you hoping to check it down on the river and just turn your cards over and hope that they win? You know, what is your mindset? Traditionally, I don't think most of us would consider King Jack to be a hand that offers 3 streets of value in this situation. The river's a deuce of diamonds, and with 91,000 in the pot, Smith fires 50,000 into the 91,000 pot. And reminder, guys, Fraser at this point only has about 155,000 behind. So it's a very bold play by Tim Smith. Would you make this bet? I don't know if I would make this bet. It feels a little bit reckless to me. Unless I'm sitting there at the table and I really have the sense that my lone opponent has a jack or is calling with some other hand, and I'm not at all concerned about him slow playing me here, I think I might be afraid to bet again on the river. But that said, I would have certainly bet more on the turn, especially if I knew that the plan was to try to get 2 healthy streets of value with this hand. I guess having bet only 18 into 55 on the turn, Smith may have felt like he didn't get enough value for his hand, or maybe he just had a sense that it was good. But anyway, he fires 50 into 91, and Fraser folds. Fraser had a worse jack. He had the Jack 7 of spades, Jack 7 suited, and Fraser eventually figured out that his hand was no good. And I see this a lot, which is probably why I prefer a larger bet on the turn, because it's very likely that, say, instead of 18, we had bet 35 into 55 on the turn. We could have actually gotten paid at that point. Because at that point, Fraser's still holding out some hope that the river could pair his other card, the 7, or possibly even the jack on top. And so because of that optimism, it's often correct to go ahead and fire a bigger bet on the turn. Once they see the river, they know their hand can't improve, and they just have to figure out whether Jack 7 of spades is good enough, hot and cold, to go ahead and pay this off. And I think most players can figure out by the river whether or not calling is correct. So, on the very next hand, the blinds went up, but they didn't take a break. Now, you guys got to understand, when there is a televised ESPN main event, ESPN gets to write all the rules of when the breaks happen. Normally, if you're used to playing in poker tournaments with long levels, 90-minute levels, or like the main event has 2-hour levels, typically there's a break after each level. But the breaks are all scattered around the schedule for the camera crew. at ESPN. The viewers at home don't want to sit through a 20-minute break waiting for the action to pick up again. And so during especially some of the early days, we end up taking dinner break at like 3:15 in the afternoon. You could call it dinner break, but you better put quotation marks around that. So that's why, even though the blinds went up, there was no pause in the action. So now the blinds are 2,000, 4,000 with a 4,000 ante. So there's 10,000 in the pot. Same table, same players. And this time the button moves. And this time Olivier Bousquet is under the gun. You recall in the previous hand he was in second position. Bousquet, holding pocket aces, raises it to 9,000. So the big blind is 4,000. He raises it to just over 2 times the big blind. Folds all the way around to Frazier, who was our big blind in the last hand and is now the small blind. And Frazier calls 7,000 more with pocket sixes. And Yuri Zivaleski, never one to shy away from a good pot odds situation, calls 5,000 more with a hand that I don't want to reveal yet. It's important to note that Frazier, who lost the previous pot, is now down to 147,000 in his stack. So 3 to the flop, 31,000 in the pot again, which is funny because that was the pot size on the flop in the previous hand. But the big difference was there were 4 players in that pot, and now this time there are 3. The flop comes 8, 5 deuce rainbow, 8 of spades, 5 of clubs, deuce of diamonds. And again, we have a donk lead. Frazier, who lost the last pot with jack 7, blind versus blind on a jack high flop, leads 12,000 into 31,000. Again, the same exact action, even though it's a different player, but it's the same action on the flop from the very previous hand. 12K into 31K, and Zivaleski calls with a hand I didn't reveal. And now Bousquet, holding pocket aces, has a decision. I mean, I think we can all agree this is an above average flop for 2 red aces. In Bousquet's shoes, do we want to raise or call? I think for me, I like raising in this spot because 2 players have shown interest in this pot here on the flop, and I almost definitely have the best hand. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, very few players donk lead out with a set. Obviously, Zivaleski's call has to make me a little uncomfortable, but he could be calling with a lot of hands. It's 8-5 deuce. He could have 4 tray. He could have any 8, any 5, any deuce. He could have 7-6, or even a gut shot with a hand like 9-6. Obviously, all hands that I can beat. Ace-4, ace-3. Like there are so many hands that Zivaleski could have called with that I'm beating. I think, on balance, this is a good spot to raise it up with the aces and go for value from one or both of your opponents. And that's what Bousquet does. He makes it 45K, a healthy bet, almost 4 times the original bet, which is great. It's 12K into 31K. And then when Zivaleski calls, Bousquet makes it 45,000. And then Frazier, who again had pocket sixes on 8-5 deuce and used this opportunity to go ahead and fire, which, by the way, I don't mind at all. I think donk leading with sixes here is perfectly acceptable. Sometimes you'll just win the pot when nobody has a pair of 8s or better. It's just hard to get value from worse. It's more of a protection bet, or maybe a see where I'm at bet. But notice 6 is a particularly good hand to do this with because you can turn your hand into a bluff if you pick up a straight draw on the turn with a 9 or a 7 or a 4. You know, hands like that, cards like that that give you a straight draw to go with your pair of 6s. You can go ahead and fire again, not have to just one and done with your donk lead. It's very important that you don't always check the turn after having led the flop. So Frazier folds and Uri calls. So now our two pros are heads up, deep stacked, very deep stacked. Uri holding two cards I haven't identified yet, and Bousquet with pocket aces. And with 133,000 now in the pot, we see a turn card, and it's the Jack of Hearts. Uri checks. Olivier with aces. The board is now Jack 8, 5 deuce, Badoogie. Should Olivier fire again here, or would you play pot control, hoping to get some value on the river? Obviously, Olivier has to know that his hand is good a lot. I mean, it's not necessarily good, right? But Uri hasn't really announced that we're beat. So, I don't know. I think this is a really close decision. You can choose to check it back, and I think that's what I would normally do. Even though the downside of that is, as I mentioned, Uri can have a lot of draws, and then if we check the turn, we give him a free card to possibly beat us with. But then the upside is a river value bet is much easier for Zivaleski to call with something like 9-8, where he has a top pair and just can't figure out what's going on. I think firing now might allow Uri to fold his top pair hands at least some of the time and cause me to lose value with my overpair. So if you do make a bet, you want to make it big enough that you don't get bluff raised, because I don't know how much heat you want when you're holding pocket aces, but you also want to make it small enough to get value from worse. And I think Olivier picks a great sizing here. He does bet the turn. He bets 70K into 133,000. So almost, just over rather, half the pot. And Uri calls again. Now at that point, because the turn bet was so healthy, I think in Olivier's shoes, we need to start considering that we might not have the winner after all. The river's a 7 of clubs for a final board of 8, 5 deuce, Jack 7 with no flush. 203,000 in this pot, and Uri checks again. So in Olivier's shoes, would you fire another bet here, or would you check and show your aces? I think it's a little bit dicey to try to get 3 streets of value with one pair from a player who's as accomplished and talented as Yuri Zivaleski. I think usually if my river bet gets action, it's because my opponent has 2 pair or better. Olivier thought about it for quite a while, maybe a minute and a half, before finally checking behind and seeing the bad news. Olivier lost with aces. Yuri Zivaleski had the 8-5 offsuit and slow played it all the way. So let's think back on this hand. He called pre-flop, getting great odds with 8-5 off. Flop top 2 pair. Was led into by the small blind. Didn't raise, just called with top 2. And then got what he wanted, a raise behind him from Bousquet, who basically told the table, I have better than 2 8s. And then Frazier got out of the way. Zivaleski just called the raise and then checked over to Bousquet again and was obliged once more with a healthy bet on the turn. I wonder if in Yuri's shoes the best play on the river is to go for a value bet, knowing that Olivier is very unlikely to fire again here on the end. I think the case for checking is that Olivier could be bluffing the whole way. And if he is, he's probably going to bluff one more time on the river here. I thought it was an interesting hand. Definitely a lot to think about. And maybe when you go to bed tonight, you can think to yourself, what can I start to do about my donk leading range. When a pot has been raised pre-flop, how can I find some hands with which to bet right out? Well, that'll do it for this week's episode. Please come see me in Las Vegas, November 22nd, or in Southern California, Newport Beach, November 23rd. So for everyone here at Tournament Poker Edge, I'm Clayton Fletcher. Thank you all so much for listening.
In Texas, please fold them, let them hit me, raise it, baby, stay with me. Lock in intuition, play the cards with babes to start, and after she's been hooked, I'll play the one that's on her heart. Oh, whoa, 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 whoa. I'll get her heart, show her what I got. Oh, whoa, 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 whoa. I'll get her heart, show her what I got. Can't read mine, no she can't read a mile. Poker face, she's got to love nobody. Can't read mine, no she can't read a mile. Poker face, she's got to love nobody. Poker face, poker face. Poker face, poker face. I wanna roll with her, a hard pair we will be. While little gambling is fun when you're with me. I love it. Russian roulette is not the same without a gun. And baby, when it's love, if it's not rough, it isn't fun. Oh,